Hi there, thanks so much for joining me today. If you're new here, my name is Molly. I'm a maker based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and this channel is a place where I share all things knitting, my recent makes, my inspirations, anything that strikes my fancy that week. Because we're fast approaching the holidays and we're, I would say, approaching the thick of gift knitting season, today I am talking about one-skein gift ideas. This is the second video in my series, so today I'll be talking about DK and worsted weight yarns. If you're looking for fingering and sport weight ideas, I released that a couple days ago and I will make sure to link it here. I will also be having a video, a relatively short one, about bulky and super bulky projects as well, and that's something to look out for in the coming days. As I said before, single skeins are definitely not all created equal in terms of the yardage per gram, in terms of the overall grammage of the skein itself. Some are 50, some are 100, whatever. But my approximate cutoffs here are patterns that use about 250 yards for DK patterns and about 200 yards for worsted weight patterns. Unfortunately, for patterns that have multiple sizes, not every size necessarily will be something that you could make out of a single skein. In honor of this video today, I am wearing a free pattern I made for myself. This is the classic ribbed hat by Pearl Soho. I have talked about making this before. I've never worn it in its finished state though. I was able to get this out of a single skein of worsted weight yarn. I think it took me about 96 grams of yarn to make this. This is a good option, and I'll take this opportunity to quickly shout out Pearl Soho patterns in general. They have so many different options for hats, cowls, scarves, wraps, shawls, blankets, baby wear. I think they might even have adult sweaters, and I think most, if not all, of their patterns are free and very well written. So if you're looking for a free pattern, they are a really good resource. I also hear their yarn is great, but I haven't had the chance to work with it yet, so I can't confirm or deny that. So let's jump into the DK patterns that I have for you today. To start out, I have one fingerless mitt pattern. It is a paid pattern, and these are the beeswax mitts by Amy Vandelar. They are $7 US, and these are a pair of fingerless mitts that have a nice honeycomb texture to them. They come in two sizes to fit 7 to 7.5 inch hand circumferences and 8 to 8.5 inch palm circumferences, so I believe those are both like adult sizes. These say that they'll take 140 to 194 yards of yarn. There are two recommended yarns. They're both primarily superwash merino. One is a like DK weight sock yarn, so a merino nylon blend. I think most wool yarns would work very well for this, maybe even like an alpaca or something, but as always, it's important to swatch your yarn to make sure that it'll behave the way that you want. The gauge is 26.5 stitches per 4 inches in pattern. I don't know exactly how this pattern knits up, but that does seem like a relatively tight gauge, which is good if you're looking for something sturdy and warm. And if you are looking to make a set for someone, there's a matching hat and cowl pattern for this as well. And you can buy a bundle of all three for $15 US. So if you have a couple skeins and you're looking to make a whole set for someone, this would be a great option. Speaking of hats, I have one free hat pattern with DK weight yarn that I'll talk about, and that is the Reigate hat by Claire Borchard. This is a hat with a nice subtle cable pattern. It looks kind of ribbed from far away, but like a little bit interesting. And it's small cables that are meant to be done without a cable needle. It comes in child, adult small, and adult large sizes, which are 14, 17, and 20 inches in circumference respectively. And the gauge for this is 14 stitches by 18 rows over 2 inches. Which is not a gauge that I'm super familiar with seeing. If you don't want to do the math yourself for a 4-inch swatch and you'd rather think about it that way, it's 28 stitches and 36 rows for a 4-inch square. This uses 75 to 250 yards of yarn, and the recommended yarn is a non-superwash 100% wool yarn. I think this cable pattern is really nice. Like I said, it's pretty subtle, and I think it would be pretty easy to do. It's one of those relatively easy types of like single stitch cables where you're knitting into the back of the second stitch on your needle and then knitting into the first stitch of your needle, and then it kind of creates this twist for you. So I don't know if most people would even call that like a cable, but I think it would be a good introduction to the general principles of cabling if it's something new to you. I have 2 neckwear patterns. I'll start with the free one, which also has a matching hat. This is the Binks Cowl by Haley Quinn. It's a free cowl pattern. It has this very classic horseshoe cable on it, and it comes in 2 sizes, child and adult. It uses approximately 175 to 220 yards of yarn, and it's written for a merino that I believe is non-superwash, but the yarn itself has been discontinued, and there's like, it seems like it was a pretty niche dyer. There's not that much information out about it, so I can't confirm that for sure. The gauge of this is 24 stitches by 28 rows in the cable pattern, or 21 stitches by 25 rows in stockinette for 4 inches. This has a really classic cable pattern that I think is very timeless. It's always something that looks good, and I think a lot of people would be interested in. And as I said, there is a matching hat, which is also free, that's available if you want to make a set. The next neckwear item I have for you is a scarf that is a paid pattern. It's the Victoria Scarf by Izzy Billing. It's £3.75 or about $4.80 US at the time of recording. And I guess I have a cable theme today because this is also a cabled pattern, but this one is a triangular scarf, like a very elongated triangle that has a subtle cable detail sort of throughout, like what almost looks like a ribbed pattern across the whole scarf. I would say it's a little bit more of a minimalist cable. It reminds me of something like the Sophie scarf in terms of the way that it appears to be constructed, although I have not made either of these, but in terms of the shape as well. It kind of has that long triangle-ish shape to it. But it obviously has like a slight bit more visual interest to it, I suppose, than the Sophie scarf through this little cable that it has. As written, it uses 241 yards of yarn, and it has a gauge of 30 stitches and 28 rows over 4 inches in pattern, which is, you know, a little bit tight for a DK weight pattern, I would say. The recommended yarn for this actually is Cardiff Cashmere, which is 100% cashmere and 120 yards per 25 gram ball. So that's like quite a high yardage for a DK weight yarn. So that's just something to maybe keep in mind. I've never had my hands on Cardiff Cashmere, so I don't know like what it feels like. I don't know much about its construction, but it does appear to be a pretty light DK yarn because I believe this is constructed from corner to corner with increases and then decreases, mirroring those increases you made at the beginning. This would be something that would be pretty easy to keep track of the like length as you go and to modify how long you're making it and how many increases you're doing based on the yardage of yarn that you had. So if you had a kitchen scale, for example, you would be able to keep track of that pretty easily and make this pattern with only the amount of yarn that you had available to you. I have one baby or toddler pattern, which is the Twister Bonnet by Dora Creadora, and this is a bonnet with like a circular like twisting rib around it almost. It has a garter ridging and an I-cord tie. It comes in newborn, 6-month, 1 year, and 3 year sizes. The gauge of this is 26 stitches equals 4 inches, and it takes 87 to 175 yards of yarn. The recommended yarn for this is a merino cotton machine washable blend, although I think it would be great for a more merino-y superwash yarn as well. I think you could also use an acrylic blend, which is something that I do a good amount when I'm knitting for kids because I think it's a little bit hardier and easier to machine wash. I've never knit a bonnet, but I think they're very cute. I've kind of wanted to knit one. They don't look super hard, but I think like the little tie and stuff is just really cute. I do have a good number of people in my life having babies soonish, so this is something that I might be revisiting in the near future for gifts for people in my life. The last pattern I have for you that is a DK weight is the Market Bag by Davina Choi. This is a free pattern. It's a mesh market bag, so it has this less lacy like eyelet mesh stitch designed to use about 100 grams of cotton yarn, so 230 to 250 yards of yarn, and no gauge is given, but I don't think this is a pattern where gauge would be particularly critical. You could kind of split your yarn appropriately. It's knit flat and then seamed, and then you add on the top edging and the handle. So if you wanted to make sure that you were only using your 50 grams, you could probably split it into like 3 balls of maybe approximately equal weight. I don't really know exactly how much you would need for the ribbing and the handle. You could also use a contrasting color for that if you had it available. And this seems like it would be a pretty practical item and a good use of smaller quantities of cotton or other plant-based fibers that you have in your stash in a DK weight. Moving on to the worsted weight patterns, I'll start out with 2 different mitt patterns. First is the Waystone Mitts by Alicia Plummer. This pattern is $7 US, and these are just little half brioche mittens that look extremely squishy and cozy. These are available in 3 sizes, 6.5, 8, and 9.5 inches of circumference in the palm. And the gauge of this is 16.5 stitches and 32 rows and 4 inches of half brioche. This uses 80 to 140 yards of the recommended yarn, which is a non-superwash wool. And you could definitely use more yarn by extending the wrist portion. They're not super big in the wrist, so I don't think you could use too much less yarn than that, but you could play around with it if you really needed to. There is a note in the description of this pattern that there are no brioche increases or decreases, so this might be a pretty good pattern for a newer brioche curious knitter. I know brioche can grow kind of slowly because you're sort of going over some of your stitches like twice. I guess half brioche is maybe a little less bad for that, but this would be a good introduction. It would knit up relatively fast compared to other brioche patterns you might choose that are in a lighter weight or are just bigger projects in general, and not having to increase and decrease can just make it a little bit simpler. I've made one of Alicia Plummer's patterns, the Favorite Flannel Cozy, which is a sweater, not mitts, but I found it to be very well written and it fit very well. It was a good construction, so I'm sure that her mitten patterns are similar. I have one other mitt pattern, and it is a free pattern. This is the Thumbless Fingerless Mitts by Carly Whitmore. It's a simple stockinette fingerless mitt pattern. It does have ribbing at the cuff and at the top of the hand portion of the mitt, and it's written for holding a sport and lace weight yarn together to make the DK, but of course you could substitute in a worsted weight wool, maybe even a DK for it. The gauge of this is 21 stitches equals 4 inches in stockinette, and it uses of a single yarn 66 to 104 yards. It comes in 2 sizes, a women's small and a women's medium, and it does give some recommendations on how to modify the pattern to make it a little bit larger, and you could of course make this longer if you had more yarn that you wanted to use up. I have one hat pattern, and it is a free pattern. It's the Colette by Julie Hayes, and this is a beret, like a very simple beret. I have no idea if berets are like cool or something people want to wear, but I think it looks really nice and clean. It's a simple stockinette stitch, and it's written with an alpaca wool blend yarn in mind to take up 120 to 140 yards. The gauge of this is 18 stitches and 27 rows over 4 inches in stockinette, and I think it would look really nice with like a fluffy yarn. I don't know why I associate berets with like fuzzy yarns, but I could definitely see using a leftover fingering sport, maybe even DK weight yarn, and some sort of fluff like merino or surrey that I had in my stash. So if this is something that you think a recipient on your list would like, this is a good option for a very classic beret pattern. I have one cowl pattern, one neckwear pattern on my list, and that is the Waves of Hope cowl by LJM Designs. And this cowl has a very interesting lace pattern. It's kind of these overlapping like half circles that are positioned like vertically on the cowl. I'll make sure to show a picture so you know what my kind of weird description means. This is written at a gauge of 16 stitches in 23 rows over 4 inches, and it's recommended that you use an Aran weight yarn, so something that might have a little bit less yardage per gram. There are a bunch of different yarns recommended, but it says it'll take about 164 to 175 yards, which might be close to an entire Aran weight skein depending on the yarn. But I think you could get away with a lighter yarn if you wanted, for something like a cowl gauge isn't super critical. This also has a matching hat pattern, as many of the patterns I've talked about today do, so if you're looking to make a whole set with some worsted weight yarn and you have a couple skeins, this is a good option. I have one baby knit that I want to talk about, and that is Troll by Gabriella Widmer Henke. It's a cute little hat that has this little like trolley point at the top of the head. I think that's a really cute look for baby hats. It has a garter brim, but you could easily change that to ribbing or something else if you prefer. It's written for 3 sizes, baby, toddler, and child, and a gauge of 16 stitches and 22 rows equals 4 inches. This is also an Aran weight pattern, so again, a slightly thicker yarn is expected, which you can kind of see reflected in that gauge, but it takes an estimated 100 to 140 yards of yarn, so that should be relatively easy to work up with a single skein of Aran yarn. I made a hat similar to this. It might have even been this pattern, but I don't think it was, for my boyfriend's nephew last Christmas. I really don't remember what pattern I used. I just know that it was cute and it moved very quickly. Something that is knit in such a heavy weight for a small person takes a really quick amount of time, and I think it's a high impact project given the amount of work that you're doing. I have one kind of silly final pattern. This is the Inside Cat by Anna Rachovic. I'm very sorry. I'll put it on the screen and down below. It is a cat-shaped bookmark. So it's just a garter stitch rectangle with I-cord legs and a tail, and then a little stuffed head with ears obviously on it. It would probably, if you wanted to add a face on it, which I guess I would recommend, it would take a little bit of embroidery floss or extra yarn from your stash to do that. Apparently the designer has recently written and published a children's book about cats, so that's a tie-in for this. I guess if you were looking for a gift for a kid, you could look into that and maybe buy the book and make the bookmark to go with it. But if you've been here a while, you know that I have a cat. Her name's Lola. She's fluffy and very cute, and I'm obsessed with her. So anything cat themed or cat related is something that I like. No gauge is given for this, although the recommended yarns are, I think, mostly wool. It says that it'll take about 30 to 40 yards of yarn. The possibilities of this are very endless. If you have, you know, any cat colored yarns in your stash, you could try to make your cat. If you have fun colors in your stash, you could make, you know, a colorful cat. Probably make this pretty easily at almost any gauge. You might just want to change the number of stitches in your rectangle, and I think this could be a really good stash buster. I know I personally am trying to get back into reading. I go through phases where I'm like a super voracious reader. I always was as a kid, but sometimes I kind of fall out of it, and I'm in one of those lulls right now, so maybe this bookmark is something I should knit to try to inspire myself to get back to some of the reading. So that's all that I have for you today. Those are DK and worsted weight patterns that you can make out of a single skein that I think would make good gifts for a variety of people on your Christmas list if you're so inclined. I'm not a huge gift knitter. as I've mentioned before, but I think that this year is one that I'll be making a few more gifts than usual, using my knitting skills for a variety of different reasons. I'd love to chat about gift knitting. Are you someone who does a lot of gift knitting? Do you have any patterns you like, any patterns you plan to use? I'd love to just chat, so please leave me a comment down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up down below and consider subscribing to my channel. I make videos about knitting every week, and I have one more gift idea video coming out in a couple of days. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.